My name is Sigge Birgisson, and I'm a QA engineer in the Bamboo and Bitbucket Pipelines teams. I'm going to tell you some of my experiences working with my team members early on in the development process so that we avoid bugs being created in the first place and instead of finding them after the fact. So first off, who's ever had a bug in production? All hands are up. Well, we have bugs too, but nowhere near the numbers that we would have had if we wouldn't have thought a little bit more about how things will fail before the fact happens. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to briefly talk about what quality assistance means and how we do it at Atlassian. Then I'm going to talk about 3 different activities that we do before any coding happens to brainstorm around failure scenarios. Design sparring sessions, feature kickoffs, and story QA kickoffs. So quality assistance. There is a big difference to the traditional quality assurance way of working. So quality is essentially owned by the team, the whole team, right? Because you can't really test quality into the product. It has to be built into the product. That's why we focus on prevention rather than detection of issues. So as a QA engineer, I do this by coaching and teaching developers how to test themselves. This way, they get better at testing and they get better at developing. So I enable the team to do their best quality work by providing assistance and utilities in their work. It also resounds very well with how Atlassian likes to scale development. So if you're scaling development, you might get quality issues. And you can sort those quality issues out by throwing a bunch of testers on a problem, but that won't solve the root cause. So we like to emphasize the importance of developers being good at development. It's also part of our culture. So play as a team and don't fuck the customer are values that every Atlassian cares about. So that's why we do quality assistance. A little bit about the team. This is the Bamboo team. It's about 15 developers, product manager, dev manager, and design, and myself as a QA. Now I've also started to work with the Bitbucket Pipelines team. Yes, we're spread across Australia and Poland, which makes the whole thing a little bit more interesting as well. And a little bit about the context. So basically, this is a generic view of how we do development. Development process starts, we've got a feature list, a release planning, so to say, a wish list of features that we want to do. And every feature has a specification, a Confluence page that defines what we want to build. And then developers take it on and define how we're going to build this. These features are then broken down into stories, and those stories are taken into development, which includes code reviews and testing. And then we put it on our dogfooding instances and ship it to customers. So as you can see, there's no QA here. There's only developers. And basically, developers are responsible for quality from the beginning to the end of the process. And I'm involved in some of those the activities that happen along the way. And this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the design sparring sessions that I do with the designer. Feature-level kickoffs with everyone involved in the feature development, and story-level QA kickoffs. And so, to emphasize again, these are the things that happen before we start developing and testing. We do some things after the fact as well, but that's not part of the talk. You can come talk to me later if you want to know more about that. So the design sparring sessions. So why do we do this? Have you ever been in the situation where you start developing and then you hit the roadblock of, I don't know how this is going to look? Anyone? Anyone? It happens every so often, right? And if you know how it's going to look, all good, and then you start coding away, and then you realize, I don't know what to do with this exception. So the designs usually don't account for the failure states. So designers are pretty good at defining user flows and defining what is the journey that this user is going to take. But they usually don't think about the failure states. And actually, a lot of the failure states we should be able to anticipate, because if you end up in a failure, like something went wrong on the server and I hit exception or I just click back. These are the things that we need to anticipate and we need to design for. Whenever I do these QA design sparring sessions, it's also a way for me as a QA to educate my designers on these failure states and what to anticipate. Every designer that I work with are really, really much better now than before at anticipating these failure cases and design for them. So this is an example. Me and James, we're looking at a user flow of a new wizard in Bamboo, and kind of encapsulates the example of what we do. So first off, we discuss what is the goal of this feature. So this is an onboarding wizard. So we have a goal, we have a clear goal that a user needs to go through these steps, right? Then we look at the feature more holistically, because me and James, we usually have slightly different understanding of what are the things in play here. Things that happen in the background, for example, are things that are not visible on the designs. We go through the flows and look at each component, each screen in separation. Think about what are the strange behaviors. Well, strange behaviors includes back, cancel. Those are not strange, really. These are cases that need to be anticipated, because you are able to click through and do those things as a user, and so we need to design for them. And we capture anything that is missing in that model. So in this case, all the dark red post-its are actually things that James and I found that he needs to take back and iterate on. So by doing this, we can iterate on it before it actually gets into development, and is not blocking any developer that's finding these cases after the fact. So failure states. Expected failure states, I've already mentioned it. They need to be thought through and designed for. So what is the error message going to be? And how do we guide the user back on track? Supportability. So the mantra here of supportability is we need to help the users help themselves before they ask us for help. So that we want to avoid support cases from users that end up in a bad state and come to us asking for help. We need to guide them by giving good error messages, linking to the appropriate documentation when needed. Which takes me to the third point, documentation. We need, in these sessions, we think about the balance between the in-app documentation that we provide and the online documentation that we link to. So these things are usually captured as, tech writer issues that need to be handled and sorted out before the development is done. Next up is feature kickoffs. So feature kickoffs, we involve everyone that is, part of the feature. So it's a PM, a feature lead, and a feature buddy, a QA. And so we start off with the feature specification. It's usually a skeleton done by the product manager saying, we want to develop this. And then the developers that are in charge of this feature have defined how are we going to build this. And when we've got this thing, we know what we're going to build and how we're going to build it. We do this kickoff to talk about how will this fail. So we talk about the overall risks of this feature. So what will stop it from shipping? And this actually happens every once in a while. We discover that one of the big risks with this feature is that the cost of operation is going to be sky high. So we need to go back to the drawing board and think about, do we actually want this feature? Other examples include security implications. So, really tough security problems that we might not have the solution for. So that might also say that we can't ship this feature. What is the test scope? So as part of the feature specification, we're talking about the feature scope. And that includes the effort and the estimation of how long will it take. And the same goes with testing. We need to be sure that we invest enough time for testing. So we need to define what is the test scope for this feature and balance that to the effort of building this feature. What is the appropriate testing? So certain features require specific testing in terms of performance or data integrity testing, data consistency testing, things like that. And these are the things that end up as testing stories in and by themselves. And what tools and data and environments do we need to be able to verify that this feature that we're building satisfies every needs, right? And these also end up as stories on the backlog we need to be able to test this, we need to set up this kind of environment, we need to test with this complex data set and things like that. And so these things affect the scope of the feature, obviously. So how do we do this? Usually we start off with a walkthrough, just like we do with the designer. But this time, the walkthrough is done by the feature lead. So what are we going to build? And how are we going to build it? So the example here is we were building REST APIs for Fisheye Crucible. And so the developer in question has spec'd out what are the endpoints that we're going to build and how we're going to build it and what is the request and response data going to be and stuff like that. And then when we talk about it, we discuss the high-level risks. So everything that was brought up when discussing this on the feature specification. So in this case, for the REST API, we knew that one big risk that we had to solve was pagination. So if you got get/users and you got thousands of users, you need to paginate that, obviously, right? And so this is a thing that we knew about from the start. And actually, these REST endpoints, we were delivering this in 4 different stages. And when we came to the 3rd stage, we were doing permission schemes. And we were doing this feature kickoff, me and the developer. And we went through what are the endpoints, how are we going to paginate. And actually, by discussing the pagination, we found actually one place where he had missed the right pagination. So he had to re-architect the endpoints. And by finding this before actually starting developing this, we avoided heaps of rework. So so we discussed the testing needed, and also we got some risks, the high-level risks that we identify, other risks, and how are we going to assess them, and how are we going to mitigate them as part of the feature kickoff. And so, for example, we discussed with the endpoints, what are the framework going to use? We're going to use Rest Assured to add functional tests for these endpoints. And certain features need specific performance testing. And basically, in the end, we need to agree on what is the scope going to be for testing this specific feature. So the outcomes, you might need to rethink the solution, as I just mentioned. And we need to iterate on what we want to build and how to build it. Specific testing tasks need their own stories. Environmental setup tasks need to be defined. What are the things that we need to do to develop and test this feature? And we actually, after the feature kickoff, we have a plan to production. So what are the things that we need to look for when testing, when deploying it to dog fooding? What are the things that we're going to look for when we deploy it to production? So post-release verification. And so we have these things before we start developing the feature. So next off is QA kickoffs on a story level. And you might think at this point, why do you need to do it both on a feature level and a story level? So the main difference is that we dig deeper on the story level. Well, in the feature kickoffs, we discuss about testing scope and how to do the testing. On a story level, we need to think about what are we going to test. So we dig deeper into the risks. What are the edge cases that we're going to hit? This is where, in a traditional world, you would say these are the test cases that testers would, come up with. So what are the edge cases? What is the strange data that we need to throw at the product to test these things? And the important part here is that since we're doing this before development, it feeds into development. So any of those edge cases that we brainstorm around will feed into what data to use in unit testing and integration testing when developing. So the QA kickoffs we do usually paired. I, as a QA engineer, I pair with the developer that is going to do this thing, and we brainstorm around what are the failures that we can anticipate here. Some teams in Atlassian actually have gotten so far in maturity that they're actually doing it paired developer plus developer, because those developers have actually trained these skills of edge case brainstorming. We, as a QA team, we provide some tools for thinking here. So because when we're developing something, we're developing a solution to a problem. And so what we're doing here is that we're the problem and the solution, and then we're going to brainstorm around how will that solution fail. And it's kind of hard to do that if you were designing the solution to actually flip that over and switch the mindset. So that's why we need to provide some tools for thinking. So one of the things that we do is a decomposition exercise. And so the example is, what are the different states and things that are part of this story, right? What are the UI elements? What are the upgrade tasks we need to do, et cetera, right? So for the REST API example, we got a certain number of components. So the UI equivalent, for example. So we're doing a REST API, so looking at get all users, obviously we have a UI equivalent in the admin interface to see all users. So we need to have that in mind. We got some validation, we got the error codes to think about, and these are the kind of components of this one endpoint. And so when we've done that, we think about the risks and test ideas on those components. So how does that work? So we got the components. What are the obvious risks? So as a developer on the team, you can usually think about a couple of cases that you need to anticipate as failures, right? Because you've done REST endpoints before. And then when you've done that and exhausted the brainstorming yourself between the two of you, we've got tools for thinking here as well. We call them heuristics. So AQG is Atlassian Quality Guidelines. It's a tool that the QA team developed as a help for development teams. So it's a tool that gives you questions that you can ask yourself. It's based off our stop-us heuristics, so stress, time, operations, platform, usability, security. So those are the kind of quality characteristics that we need to think about. And by thinking about stress, so how does this functionality work with heaps of items? How does the empty state look? And things like that. How are we handling a lot of processing? Timing, for example, concurrency. How do we handle concurrency? Do we have timeouts? And things like that, right? And so by taking those heuristics and applying to the components, we get something similar to this. So the UI equivalent, we need to think about the UI and API consistency, right? For validation, we need to not only validate new data, but also existing data. And input and output needs to be the same. And this is where, actually, by doing this on this REST, these endpoints, we figured out that, well, backslash doesn't work very well in JSON, right? And and we actually had a couple of fields that we allowed backslash. So we could anticipate that we need to handle those cases where we're going to return backslash in usernames, I think it was. Right? So the outcomes of this Your QA kickoffs are testing notes. Basically, it's a list of risks and test ideas on this specific story that you're developing. We agree on what testing to do and how to do those things. So the edge cases, in our case, we were going to handle a lot of them by the functional testing with rest assured. We also created testing notes that defined like what are the things that we need to one-off manually test when we deploy to our dog fooding, etc. So we needed to test things, these endpoints with our dog fooding data. And basically, what is important is that it's usable by the developer when it comes into development, right? So being able to reference it and use it within development is what we need to use this for. It's not a checklist. So checklists have a tendency of becoming, you know, check this, check this, check this. And basically, it's more of a list of risks that we need to mitigate within development. And this is what they might look like. Think about these things. Think about dialogue lock state, for example. So these are the 3 activities that I've talked to you about. What does it take to do this? Well, as a QA engineer, I need to have quite deep product knowledge. By working with everyone on the team, I do get the broader knowledge from the whole team, but I need to really know about the product to be able to do these efficiently. And the product knowledge is a continuous journey. I also need to know about the integrations and the platforms that we run on. I need to know about customers and how they use our product. What are the pain points that they have? So as a QA engineer, I work with our support enablement team to understand the pain points of customers. And finally, preparations. So to be able to add value in all these interactions, I mean, developers are smart people. Developers are really smart, and I need to prepare my knowledge of this specific story. What are the surrounding things that surround that functionality, and prepare that before going into story level QA kickoffs or feature kickoffs. And so it's crucial for credibility. If you have a test team and you want to adopt these things, it's crucial for their credibility to prepare for these things, because otherwise you might have, you know, developers that are, you know, they know everything, and if you are trying to push this process onto them and the tester in question doesn't prepare, it is, you know, bound to failure. But how do you start? So if you think that this is a really great way of avoiding things, you know, going forward, you can just pick up the next development item. On Monday, you go pick up the next development item, the next story, and then you pull in either one or more people to brainstorm around what are the things and failures that we need to avoid by developing this. So that way you will avoid creating bugs in the first place. Thank you very much.